Hello and welcome back. You are listening to a very special edition of The Deep Dive, brought to you by Simplified UPSC by PPP.
Hello, everyone.
I'm your host, and as always, I am ready to take a huge stack of dense source material. We're talking textbooks, articles, research papers, and just pull out the gold nuggets you actually need. And today, we are tackling a giant.
We really are. This is one of those topics that, everyone thinks they know, but when you really start peeling back the layers, it is just incredibly complex and, frankly, quite heartbreaking.
We are diving deep into poverty. And I know for our listeners, especially for you serious UPSC aspirants out there, this isn't just a social issue you read about in the newspaper.
Oh, not at all.
This is a massive, critical chunk of your general studies syllabus. I mean, we're talking GS Paper 2, GS Paper 3, economics, social justice.
And it's a perennial favorite for the essay paper, isn't it? It always comes up in some form or another.
Absolutely. It is the fundamental challenge of the Indian economy. If you look at the history of the exam, poverty is a high-scoring topic, but, and this is a big but, only if you move beyond the generic poverty is bad arguments.
That won't get you the marks. You need the nuance. You absolutely need the specific definitions, the history of measurement, the data trends, and, crucially, the critical assessment of government policy.
Exactly. And that is our mission today. We are doing a detailed audio analysis of the NCERT Class 11 economics textbook. Specifically, it's Unit 3, Chapter 4, Poverty. And we're going to tear this chapter apart, line by line, concept by concept.
We'll look at who the poor actually are, on the ground. Then we'll get into how we've tried to count them, from the days of the British Raj all the way to the modern expert groups.
And the causes, both historical and institutional. And of course, the big one, the policies.
Right.
What worked, what failed, and, the million-dollar question, why?
And we will be linking this to previous year questions, or PYQs, all the way through.
Because that's where the rubber meets the road. But before we jump into the deep end, I do have a humble request for everyone listening right now.
A very important one.
If you want to improve your retention of this material, and just as importantly, help the YouTube algorithm find other learners just like you, please take a second and subscribe to the channel.
And if you're in a position to do so, if you're capable, please consider supporting the team on Patreon. I mean, this kind of detailed analysis takes a huge amount of time and resources.
It really does.
And your support is what allows us to keep bringing you this super useful content.
A huge warm shout out to all our current supporters. Honestly, you guys are the fuel in the engine. And hey, while you're at it, don't forget to like the video and share your valuable comments. We do read them, and we love the feedback.
Also, just a quick logistical note. We know you need notes to revise this stuff, so free notes with practice PYQs for this very deep dive are available right now on our public Telegram channel. The link is in the description.
But if you want the full experience, the premium package, we have the private Telegram library.
This is for the really serious aspirants.
If you join that, you get access to all the videos of this series at once, all perfectly organized. Plus, you get the corresponding premium notes.
And when we say premium, we mean it. We're talking really detailed notes, extra PYQs that we don't cover here. And this is the big one, model mains answers. That's gold dust for exam prep.
It really is. To join, just DM us on the public Telegram channel.
Yeah.
Okay, housekeeping done.
I think so. Let's get into it.
Let's get to work. So, Chapter 4, Poverty. The text starts with a pretty heavy quote, actually. It's from Jawaharlal Nehru on the eve of independence in 1947. He said that independence was just a step, an opening of opportunity to the great triumphs that await us.
And one of those triumphs was the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease. That was the vision, the founding promise of the Republic.
The reality, though, as the chapter points out, is that poverty is not just a challenge for India. It is the challenge.
And the text gives us a staggering statistic right on the first page. It just stops you in your tracks. More than 1/5 of the world's poor live in India alone.
1/5. Let that sink in. 1 out of every 5 poor people on the entire planet lives in India.
So when we talk about the poor in an exam answer, or just in trying to understand the economy, who are we actually really talking about? Because poor can feel like such a vague term.
It can be. And the NCERT does a great job of visualizing this for us. It splits the view into urban and rural, which is absolutely crucial for any GS answer because the dynamics are so different.
Right. Let's start with the urban poor. Who are they, according to the text?
In the cities, you're looking at your pushcart vendors, street cobblers, the people picking through garbage rag pickers, and of course, beggars. But the text uses a very interesting, very conceptual phrase here. It calls them an overflow.
An overflow, as in spilling over from somewhere. Yes, exactly. The urban poor are largely the overflow of the rural poor. These are people who migrated or were forced to migrate to urban areas in search of any kind of livelihood because the village economy simply couldn't sustain them anymore.
So it's a migration of distress, not really a migration of opportunity.
Precisely. They don't have the technical skills for the high-end city jobs, the formal sector jobs. So they fall into the informal sector. They end up living in slums, on the pavements, working for daily wages if they're lucky. It's essentially rural poverty that has just relocated to the city.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Okay, now let's flip that. Who are the rural poor?
Here, the categories are a bit different. You have the landless agricultural laborers who own nothing but their ability to work. You have cultivators, but with very, very small, often unviable land holdings.
And I guess landless laborers doing other things too, not just farming.
Yes, non-agricultural jobs, maybe working in a local brick kiln or as a construction helper. But the common thread, the absolute core of the issue here is the lack of assets, particularly land.
And the text describes this condition not just as a lack of money, but as a kind of vicious circle of characteristics. It's a whole lifestyle of deprivation that just seems to reinforce itself.
It is multidimensional. That's a key word to use in your answers. It's not a single problem. And we should probably break down that circle because understanding these dimensions helps you write a much richer essay.
Let's do it. So first up is housing.
Right. They live in what are called kucha hutments. We're talking walls made of baked mud, maybe some grass, bamboo for the roof. There's no stability, no protection from the elements, whether it's a harsh summer or a monsoon.
And from a place to live, we go to what you eat, food security.
Or rather, the complete lack of it. Starvation and hunger are key features of poverty. The text is very explicit about this. It says many do not get 2 square meals a day.
And that leads directly to the next point, doesn't it? Health.
Immediately. If you're not eating enough, you get malnutrition.
Which the text says is alarmingly high.
Alarmingly high. And that leads to physical weakness, to illness, to disability. And now think about the economic impact of that. If your body is your only asset because you're a manual laborer and you are physically weak or chronically sick, you simply cannot earn.
And if you cannot earn, you cannot buy food.
And if you cannot buy food, you get even sicker. That's the trap. It's a downward spiral.
And on top of all that, you have the infrastructure aspect.
Yeah.
The text mentions a lack of access to basic things we take for granted.
Absolutely. No electricity, no access to safe, clean drinking water, which brings its own host of diseases.
And how they cook.
The primary cooking fuel is firewood or cow dung cake, which means hours spent collecting it, usually by women and children, and it also means indoor air pollution. That causes severe respiratory issues, which feeds right back into the health trap we just talked about.
It's just layer upon layer of disadvantage.
And we can't ignore the social factors mentioned in the text. Within these poor households, gender inequality is extreme. Women and female children often receive less care, less food, less access to health care.
And then there's the predator in this whole system.
The moneylender.
Chronic indebtedness.
Yes, because they have no assets, they can't get loans from formal banks. So when a crisis hits, a medical emergency, a crop failure, they have to go to the local moneylender.
Who charges exorbitant interest rates.
Exactly, exploitative rates. So they end up working not to build a future, not to get ahead, but just to pay off the interest on a loan they took in the past to survive. This vulnerability keeps them locked in that cycle forever.
So we have a very clear, very grim, qualitative picture of who the poor are. But for a government to do anything about it, and for us as students to study it, we need to be able to count them. We need a line. We need a poverty line.
Exactly. This brings us to section 2 of our discussion, measuring misery. And this is where the history gets really, really fascinating, especially for any history buffs listening. You might think these poverty lines are a modern post-independence invention.
But they're not.
Not at all. We are going back to the pre-independence era, to the grand old man of India.
Dadabhai Noroji.
That's the one. He was the first person to seriously discuss and try to calculate a poverty line for India. But you have to remember, he didn't have the kind of data we do today. He didn't have the National Sample Survey Organization, the NSSO.
So what did he use? How could he possibly calculate it?
He used a very, very creative and clever metric, the jail cost of living.
The jail cost of living, you mean he literally looked at what it cost to feed a prisoner?
Exactly that. His logic was that the government, even the colonial government, had a basic responsibility to keep its prisoners alive. So The menu provided to a prisoner must represent a baseline subsistence level of consumption. It's a floor below which you cannot fall.
That's ingenious, but wait a minute. Society isn't made up entirely of adult men, like a jail population might be. You have children, you have infants. Their needs are different.
Correct. And NITI was smart enough to account for that. He made an adjustment. He used a weighted average to create a poverty line for the general population. And the formula he used is actually quite brilliant for its time.
Okay, let's unpack the math here, because this is a specific point in the NCERT, and it shows the rigor of his thinking. It's a great detail to include in an answer.
Right. So he assumed that about 1/3 of the total population consisted of children, and he split this group of children further.
Okay.
He figured about 1/6 of the total population were very small children, infants, who consumed nil, or basically very little solid food, maybe just breast milk.
Right, so their cost is effectively zero.
Then another 1/6 were older children who he estimated would consume about half of an adult diet.
Okay, so 1/6 at zero, 1/6 at half. What about the rest?
The remaining 2/3 of the population were adults, consuming a full diet, the full jail cost of living.
So the math is 1/6 times zero plus 1/6 times half plus 2/3 times full.
Exactly. And if you do the arithmetic on that, it comes out to 3/4. So NITI's poverty line was calculated as 30/4 of the adult jail cost of living.
That is such a cool historical nugget. It really shows that this attempt to measure poverty scientifically has very deep roots in Indian intellectual history.
It absolutely does. But obviously, after independence, the new Indian government needed something more robust, more systematic. And this led to a whole series of committees and expert groups.
The text mentions a timeline.
Yes. The Planning Commission formed a study group way back in 1962. Then came the Task Force on Projections of Minimum Needs in 1979.
And then more expert groups in 1989 and 2005. But through all of these, the core idea largely revolved around one major metric, right?
Yes, calories. The nutritional standard. This is the definition that most students are probably familiar with. The concept was to anchor the poverty line to a minimum energy intake.
And they set a specific number for this.
They did. The norm was set at 2,400 calories per person per day for rural areas.
And 2,100 calories per person per day for urban areas.
Exactly.
Okay, wait, let's pause right there, because I'll be honest, I always found this a little counterintuitive. Why is the rural requirement higher? You'd think city life, with all its stress and hustle, would be more demanding.
It's a common point of confusion, but the logic is purely about physical exertion. The underlying assumption is that people in rural areas are engaged in much harder physical labor. We're talking farming, plowing, carrying heavy loads, which requires more energy than the average, often more sedentary urban dweller.
Okay, that makes sense when you put it like that. But here is where it gets even more confusing, and this is a classic trap in the exam. We take these calorie norms and translate them into money, the monthly per capita expenditure, or MPCE.
Right. How much money do you need to buy that many calories?
Exactly. And the 2011-12 benchmark mentioned in the text sets the monetary line at Rs 816 per month for a person in a rural area and Rs 1,000 per month for a person in an urban area.
And I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. The rural person needs more calories, 2,400 versus 2,100, but their poverty line in money terms is lower, 816 versus 1,000. Why is the line lower if they need to eat more?
It's all about the cost of living, the price of goods. The basic idea is that you can buy more with the same amount of money in a village than you can in a city.
So food is just cheaper in rural areas.
Generally, yes. Food grains and other essential items are cheaper, so the monetary equivalent of 2,400 calories in a village is less than the monetary equivalent of 2,100 calories in a big city. The purchasing power of that rupee is different.
Got it. So that's the logic. But the NCERT and, many economists are pretty critical of this whole method of just counting heads below a line. They call it the head count ratio.
Yes, the head count ratio, or HCR, and it has some major limitations. The biggest problem is that it groups all the poor together. It makes no distinction between the different levels of poverty.
What do you mean?
It treats a person who has absolutely nothing, the truly destitute, the starvation cases, exactly the same as a person who is just one single rupee below the poverty line. They're both just counted as one poor person.
So it doesn't tell you the depth of the poverty?
Not at all. It doesn't help you differentiate the very poor from the just poor, which is crucial for targeting government schemes.
And it ignores so many other factors, right?
Right.
The text mentions that this MPCE method is Basically just using food as a proxy for overall well-being.
Exactly. But what about everything else? What about access to education for your children? What about basic health care? What about sanitation? I mean, you could be eating 2,400 calories a day, but drinking contaminated water and getting sick all the time. Are you really not poor?
Of course you are. You are still deeply deprived.
And this is where the text introduces a really useful concept, shown in chart 4.2. It's the idea of categorizing the poor, which is so important for understanding the dynamics of poverty. It's not a static, unchanging block of people.
Right. The chart divides them into chronic, transient, and non-poor. Let's break those down, because this is great for adding nuance to an answer.
First, you have the chronic poor. These are people who are either always poor or usually poor. Their baseline economic status is below the poverty line.
So like a landless, daily wage laborer.
A perfect example. They might have a tiny bit more money during the peak harvest season, but for the vast majority of the year, they are in poverty.
Okay, then there's the transient poor. As the name suggests, this is the group that moves in and out of poverty.
And we can split this group further. You have the churning poor. Seasonal workers are the classic example here. They move above the poverty line when work is available, say, during sowing or harvest season, and then they fall right back below it when the agricultural season ends.
So they're constantly churning around the line.
Exactly. And also in this transient category are the occasionally poor. These are people who are normally okay, usually non-poor, but they get hit by a sudden shock.
Like a medical emergency in the family.
Or a bad crop failure due to a drought or, a global pandemic that shuts down their small business. Some external shock pushes them down temporarily.
And finally, you have the non-poor, who, thankfully, are never poor. The criticism here, and the reason this chart is so important, is that our main mechanism, the head count ratio, doesn't really help us distinguish between these groups.
Precisely. And that matters for policy. A scheme designed to help the chronic poor who need fundamental asset building has to be different from a scheme for the transient poor who might just need something like insurance or temporary credit to get through a tough patch.
Grouping them all together just blunts the policy response.
It does. And that's why the text makes a point of mentioning the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. He famously argued that poverty is about much more than just income. It's about a lack of capability.
The freedom to live a life you value.
Exactly. And he argued we need more nuanced tools to measure this. He developed the Sen Index. There's also something called the Poverty Gap Index, which doesn't just count the poor, but measures the depth of their poverty. On average, how far below the line are they?
It's about the quality of the poverty, if we can even use a phrase like that.
Or the intensity of the deprivation. A much better way to put it.
Okay, so that's how we measure it. Let's move on to section 3, the numbers game. What do the trends actually say? Are we winning this war on poverty, or are we not?
Well, the official data for this comes from the Planning Commission, which is now the NITI Aayog, and it's based on the big consumption expenditure surveys done by the NSSO, the National Sample Survey Organization.
And what does that data show?
If you look at the long-term trends, say from 1973 up to 2012, which is the period the text focuses on, there is some good news and there is some bad news.
Okay, let's have the good news first.
The good news is that the head count ratio, the percentage of people who are poor, has declined quite dramatically. In 1973-74, it was 55%. More than half the country was officially below the poverty line.
Astonishing number.
It is. But by 2011-12, that had dropped all the way down to 22%.
Wow. That is a massive drop. From over half the population to roughly 1/5. On the face of it, that sounds like a huge success story.
And in relative terms, it is a success. It's a significant achievement.
Yeah.
But, and here's the bad news, the other side of the coin. The absolute number of poor people hasn't dropped nearly as fast.
Or not.
Well, in 1973, there were over 320 million poor people in India. By 2011-12, 4 decades later, there were still about 270 million.
So we only reduced the total number by about 50 million people in 40 years.
Exactly. And the reason for this gap is
Population growth.
population growth. We added so many people to the overall population during that time that even though the percentage of poor people dropped, the sheer mass of human suffering remained huge.
That's a very sobering point. And where are these 270 million people living? Is it still a rural problem?
Overwhelmingly. The text makes a very strong point about this. In 2012, 80% of India's poor still resided in rural areas. And what's even more striking is that this figure had barely changed since 1973.
So after 4 decades of development, poverty in India is still predominantly a rural phenomenon. That's a key takeaway for anyone writing an essay on this.
A critical takeaway. So what about across the country? Is poverty evenly spread across the states?
I'm guessing not.
Not at all. There is a serious regional disparity. The text highlights a group of states like Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Uttar Pradesh, where poverty levels are still far above the national average.
But then you have some success stories mentioned.
Yes, you do. States like West Bengal and Tamil Nadu are pointed out for having reduced poverty quite significantly.
Okay, so why them? What did they do differently that the other states didn't?
The text hints at this, and it's something that's widely discussed in development economics. In the case of West Bengal, a lot of the success is attributed to land reforms.
Like Operation Bargain.
Exactly. Giving legal rights and security of tenure to sharecroppers. They tackled that core problem of asset distribution head on.
And Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu is famous for its effective and relatively well-run public distribution system, or PDS. They made sure that the subsidized food actually reached the people who needed it, which directly addressed the hunger and malnutrition aspect of that vicious circle.
This connects perfectly to a previous year question. Let's bring in the exam perspective here.
Let's do it.
This is from the 2015 GS Paper 2. Though there have been several different estimates of poverty in India, all indicate reduction in poverty levels over time. Do you agree? Critically examined with reference to urban and rural poverty indicators.
That is a perfect question to use the data we've just discussed. It's a classic critically examined question.
So how would you structure the answer?
Well, first you address the first part. Do you agree? And the answer is yes, broadly. You agree by quoting the headcount ratio data, the fall from 55% to 22%. That validates the premise of the question.
And then comes the critically examined part.
Right. This is where you bring in the nuance. You say, however, and then you critique the statement. You point out that the absolute numbers haven't fallen as fast. You highlight the persistence of the rural concentration of poverty, with 80% of the poor still in villages.
And you can mention the overflow concept.
Absolutely. You can mention that urban poverty, while lower in percentage terms, is in some ways just displaced rural poverty, and that distress migration is a huge issue. So the reduction isn't as simple or as rosy as the headline percentage makes it look.
It's a yes, but answer, the best kind of answer for the mains exam.
That's what gets you the top marks. You validate the examiner's premise, and then you complicate it with data and deeper analysis.
Okay, so we know who they are, we know how to count them, we know the trends, but the big question, the fundamental question is, why? Section 4, the root causes. Why does poverty persist in a country with so much potential and so much growth?
The text divides the causes into 3 broad categories, which is a very useful framework. You have the historical factors, the institutional and social factors, and the economic factors.
And you really can't understand Indian poverty without starting with history, with the British Raj.
The colonial legacy, it was just devastating. The text talks about the systematic deindustrialization of the Indian economy.
They didn't want us competing with their industries.
Exactly. Take the textile industry in Bengal. We're talking about the world-famous muslin cloth.
The legendary Malmal cloth, which was so fine you could pull a whole sari through a ring.
That's the one. Dhaka was a global hub for this exquisite, high-value textile. And the British systematically destroyed this industry through tariffs and coercion to make way for the cheap, machine-made cloth from Manchester.
So they basically turned us into a captive market.
A supplier of raw cotton and a market for their finished exports. This is the core of the drain of wealth theory.
And this had a huge impact on the workforce, didn't it?
A catastrophic one. It led to the ruralization of the workforce. All these skilled artisans, the weavers, the spinners, lost their jobs. They had no choice but to go back to the land, to agriculture, which just overcrowded an already struggling sector.
And then on top of that, there were the famines.
The famines were brutal. The text gives a chilling statistic. 26 million people died in famines between 1875 and 1900.
26 million. That's a number that is just hard to even comprehend. So we basically started our journey at independence with a deeply scarred, impoverished, illiterate, and very unhealthy population.
We started from a very, very low base. But we can't blame everything on history. The text is clear that we have internal factors too, institutional and social factors.
Well, and the biggest one mentioned is
Social exclusion, the caste system.
it's a structural barrier to opportunity.
Absolutely. For centuries, it has prevented people from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes from accessing education, from owning land, from getting good jobs. It's a rigid structural barrier that perpetuates poverty across generations.
And linked to that is the unequal distribution of assets.
particularly land, which is the primary productive asset in rural India. A small number of people own a large proportion of the land. So if you're born into a poor, landless family, you have nothing to sell but your labor.
And in a country with 1 billion people, labor is cheap.
Exactly. There are far too many people willing to work for very low wages, which keeps everyone trapped.
Okay, so those are the historical and social structures. What about the purely economic factors?
Well, the first is the high dependence on agriculture itself. It's seasonal work, and it's hugely dependent on the weather. If the monsoon fails, you starve, there's no safety net.
And the fragmentation of land holdings.
Yes. Over generations, land gets divided among sons, so the plots become smaller and smaller and eventually just unviable to farm profitably.
Yeah.
And then there's inflation. The text uses a great line here. It calls inflation a tax on the poor.
I love that line. Inflation is a tax on the poor. It's perfect for an essay.
It is, because a steep rise in food grain prices hits them the hardest. A rich person spends maybe 10% of their income on food. A poor person spends maybe 60 or 70%.
So if the price of wheat or rice goes up by 10 rupees, a wealthy person doesn't even notice. A poor person has to skip a meal.
Exactly. It erodes their purchasing power much more severely.
The text has a very heartbreaking box section that illustrates all of this. It's about the distress among cotton farmers.
Yes, the wave of farmer suicides, particularly in states like Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra. This is a real-world case study of how all these economic factors come together in a perfect storm.
So what happened?
Small farmers were encouraged to shift from growing food crops for their own consumption to growing cash crops like cotton, hoping for a better income. But cash crops are very high risk.
You need to buy a lot of inputs.
Very high input costs, expensive hybrid seeds, pesticides, fertilizers. To afford all this, they need credit. But the formal banks often won't lend to a small farmer who has no collateral.
So they go to the moneylender.
And we're back to that trap. Now imagine the crop fails because of a bad monsoon. Or because of globalization, the international price of cotton crashes.
They're left with nothing to sell, but they still have the debt.
They're stuck in a debt trap. They have no other assets to sell to pay it off. The money lender is knocking at their door. The social humiliation, the immense stress. The text explicitly links this economic spiral to the tragic wave of suicides. It's a horrifying example of how transient poverty can become fatal.
It's heavy stuff. But the government hasn't just been sitting idle. Since independence, there has been a massive, concerted effort to fight this.
A huge effort.
Which brings us to Section 5, Fighting Back, the Policies and Programs. The insert categorizes the government's approach into 3 distinct prongs or strategies over the years. This is a very useful framework for organizing your answers.
It is. The first strategy was the growth-oriented approach. The second was direct poverty alleviation programs, specific schemes. And the third was providing minimum basic amenities.
Let's take them one by one. The growth-oriented approach. This was the early plan, right? The thinking behind the first few 5-year plans.
Yes, absolutely. The theory was quite simple and, at the time, very popular globally. The idea was grow the overall economy. Build big industries, big dams, increase the GDP, and the benefits of this growth will eventually trickle down to the poor.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
That was the hope.
Spoiler alert, it didn't really trickle down.
Not effectively, no. And the text gives 2 main reasons why this strategy failed to make a big dent in poverty on its own.
What were they?
One was population growth. The economy grew, but the population grew almost just as fast. So per capita income didn't rise much for the average person. The benefits were spread too thin.
And the second reason?
The benefits of the growth weren't evenly distributed. Think about the Green Revolution. It dramatically increased food production, which was a huge success. But initially, its benefits were restricted to certain geographies, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, and to the larger farmers who could afford the new seeds and fertilizers. The poor, landless laborer in Bihar didn't see much benefit.
So, realizing that just growing the pie wasn't enough, the government moved to strategy 2, specific poverty alleviation programs.
Yes. This was a shift in the 1970s towards a more direct attack on poverty.
And this is where we get the famous alphabet soup of government schemes, isn't it?
It is. And you can classify these schemes into 2 broad types, which is helpful for remembering them. Self-employment schemes and wage employment schemes.
Okay, let's start with self-employment. What does a scheme like that actually look like?
These are schemes designed to help poor people create their own assets and start their own small businesses to generate income.
So giving them a fishing rod instead of just a fish.
That's the idea. The text mentions a few. There's the REGP, or Rural Employment Generation Program. This was run by the County and Village Industries Commission, KVIC, and it helped people set up small industries in rural areas.
Okay, what else?
There was the PMRY, or Prime Minister's Rozgar Yojana. This was targeted at educated but unemployed youth, providing them with bank loans to start their own enterprises. And for the cities, there was the SJSRY, or Swarna Jayanti Shahari Rozgar Yojana, which focused on both self-employment and wage employment in urban areas.
Okay, so that's one side. The other side is wage employment. This is where the government becomes the employer of last resort.
Exactly. This is for the people who have nothing but their unskilled labor to sell. The classic early example from the 1970s was the Food for Work program. The government would employ people to build rural infrastructure, like roads or canals, and pay them not in cash, but directly in food grains.
But the big one, the real game changer in this space, is mentioned implicitly in the text as a major intervention.
You mean MGNREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act?
Yes. It guarantees every rural household at least 100 days of paid wage employment per year. If the private market won't hire you, the government will. This puts a floor under rural wages and acts as a massive social safety net.
It's a rights-based approach to employment.
Now let's bring in another PYQ here because it fits perfectly.
Let's do it.
This is also from 2015 GS2. The self-help group SHG-Bank Linkage program has proved to be one of the most effective poverty alleviation programs. Elucidate.
Yeah.
Where does something like SHGs fit into this framework?
That's a great question. It fits right into the self-employment and credit side of things. It's one of the most powerful tools against poverty.
So how does it work?
Remember one of the root causes we discussed: the lack of access to formal credit and the resulting dependence on exploitative moneylenders. SHGs tackle this head-on.
A group of women usually pool their savings.
Exactly. A small group of poor women get together and pool their tiny savings, maybe 10 or 20 rupees a week. Over time, they build a small corpus of funds. The bank linkage program then connects these registered SHGs to formal banks.
So the bank lends to the group, not the individual.
Precisely. And the group uses peer pressure to ensure repayment. Suddenly, these women can get credit for small enterprises, maybe buying a sewing machine or a cow at 10 or 12% interest instead of 50 or 100% from the moneylender.
It breaks the cycle of debt.
It breaks the cycle, empowers women, and helps them create assets. That's why it's so effective. It's bottom-up, sustainable, and community-led.
That's a great connection. Okay, on to the final prong, strategy 3, providing minimum basic amenities. What's the thinking here?
This is the government acknowledging that even if you have a small income or a job, you might not be able to afford quality education, healthcare, or even enough food. These things are considered essential for human development.
So this is social consumption, as the text calls it.
Right. The government steps in to provide these services either for free or at a highly subsidized rate. The most famous example is the PDS, the Public Distribution System, providing subsidized food grains through ration shops.
And the midday meal scheme in schools.
Which is a brilliant policy because it solves two problems at once. It provides crucial nutrition to children, and it acts as a powerful incentive for poor parents to send their children to school.
And infrastructure is part of this too, right?
Yes. Schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which focuses on building all-weather roads to connect every village. Because if a farmer can't get their produce to the market, they'll always be poor. Connectivity is critical.
And finally, under this, we have social security nets.
This is for the most vulnerable who can't work. The elderly, destitute widows, people with disabilities. The NSAP, or National Social Assistance Program, provides them with a small pension to survive.
And a more recent major scheme we have to mention is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana from 2014.
The bank account scheme?
But it's about much more than just opening a bank account, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive push for financial inclusion. By bringing hundreds of millions of poor people into the formal banking system, it allows for the direct benefit transfer, or DBT, of government subsidies.
Which cuts out the middleman.
It cuts out the middleman and drastically reduces the corruption and leakage that used to plague these schemes. Plus, the accounts come bundled with a small amount of accident and life insurance. It's about integrating the poor into the formal financial system of the country.
So, we have the strategies, we have the growth, we have this huge array of schemes.
Yeah.
Now comes the final, critical assessment, Section 6. Did it work? What's the verdict?
It is, as you'd expect, a very mixed bag. There are some definite successes that we should acknowledge.
What are the big wins?
The biggest success is that the level of absolute poverty has declined. And crucially, in the 1990s, for the first time since independence, the absolute number of poor people finally started to drop consistently.
And we saw that some states did manage to make real progress.
Yes. States like West Bengal and Tamil Nadu prove that with the right policies, be it land reforms or a strong PDS, it is possible to reduce poverty significantly, even below the national average. So it's not an impossible task.
But there's always a but.
A very big but. The failures and shortcomings are glaring, and the NCERT is quite blunt about them.
So what went wrong?
First and foremost, implementation. The text uses very strong language here. It talks about schemes being run by ill-motivated and inadequately trained officials. There's rampant corruption and a massive leakage of resources.
This is the famous quote from Rajiv Gandhi, isn't it? That for every rupee sent from the center, only 15 pays actually reaches the intended beneficiary.
Exactly. That quote perfectly captures the problem of inefficiency and corruption in the delivery mechanism. The resources are often appropriated by the non-poor.
What does that mean?
It means the benefits are captured by the local elite or politically connected people rather than the truly needy and intended beneficiaries. So the scheme looks good on paper, but the impact on the ground is minimal.
So that's the implementation problem. What else?
Second, resource allocation. Even with all these schemes, the amount of funds allocated is often insufficient when you compare it to the sheer magnitude of the problem.
Yeah.
We're talking about helping 270 million people. That requires a massive financial commitment.
And third,
despite all these programs, the outcomes on basic amenities are still very poor. Hunger, malnutrition, and illiteracy persist at very high levels. We still have a huge number of people living in kucha houses without sanitation or clean water. The schemes haven't solved these fundamental deprivations.
And the text points to a very deep, almost philosophical missing link in our whole approach.
This is, for me, the most important critique in the entire chapter.
What is it?
It argues that for all their good intentions, government policies have failed to radically change the underlying structures of the economy. They have failed to change asset ownership.
So we haven't done enough land redistribution.
Exactly. Barring a few states, we haven't done massive land redistribution. The poor still don't own the means of production, the land, the capital, so they remain dependent.
And the other part of this missing link is about participation.
Yes. The approach has always been very top-down. The government designs a scheme in Delhi and tries to implement it. It treats the poor as passive recipients of charity, as beneficiaries.
Instead of as active participants in their own development.
Precisely. The text argues for social mobilization. The poor need to be empowered, organized, and encouraged to participate in the growth process. They need a voice in the decisions that affect their lives, not just a handout. Until they are active partners in their own development, poverty will persist.
That is a very powerful insight. It's not just about giving people money, it's about giving them power and capability.
That's the core message.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today. From the very definition of poverty and the conditions people live in, to the clever math, the jail cost of living, to the data trends, the deep-rooted causes, and the mixed results of decades of policy.
It's a huge topic.
Let's try and wrap this up with a quick outro summary.
I think if you take one thing away from this deep dive, let it be this. India has moved the needle. We went from a country where over half the population was poor to one where it's about a fifth. That is a real, tangible achievement, and we shouldn't dismiss it.
But the job is only half done.
Not even. The rural-urban divide is still huge. The trickle-down theory, on its own, has largely failed to deliver, and the persistence of hunger and malnutrition is a national shame.
And the future lies not just in alleviation, which sounds like you're just treating a symptom, but in true empowerment.
Exactly.
And on that note, here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on, something to mull over as you continue your prep. We talk a lot about the number of poor people. We are obsessed with the headcount ratio, the percentages, the absolute numbers. But have we really improved the quality of life for those who have just crossed the line?
That's a deep question.
Poverty isn't just about income, as Amartya taught us. It's about freedom, the freedom to be and to do. If a person now earns 20 rupees above the poverty line, but they still can't get decent health care, their children can't get a quality education, they can't drink safe water, and they have no voice in their local community, are they truly free of poverty?
It challenges the very definition we use.
Exactly. Until the poor are truly empowered to participate in and benefit from the growth process, is the job really truly done?
Something to think about.
On that note, Thank you so much for listening to this deep dive. If you found this helpful for your UPSC prep, please, and I mean this sincerely, please subscribe to the channel. It tells us we're doing something right and helps others find this content.
And if you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It keeps the lights on and allows us to keep these detailed episodes coming. A big, big shout out to all our supporters. You are the ones who make this possible.
Don't forget to like and comment below. Let us know what topic you want us to tackle next.
And remember to head over to the public Telegram channel for your free notes and practice PYQs for this episode.
And for the truly serious learners, DM us on that public channel to join the private Telegram library. You'll get the premium notes, all the extra PYQs, and those crucial model mains answers.
It's a great resource.
This has been Simplified UPSC by PPP. Keep learning and stay curious.
See you in the next one.